The Fig Tree of Longbourn, Jarmo Palamaki. Chapter 1. It was a chilly winter morning on the first advent of 1811, and the Meryton church was abuzz with the gentle murmur of the congregation as they settled into their pews. The Bennet family, comprising Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, took their seats near the front, eager to hear the parson's sermon. As Reverend Williams, the parson of Meryton, a wise and kind-hearted man, began to speak, the audience fell silent, hanging onto his every word. He opened his Bible to the book of Luke, chapter 13, verses 6-9, and began to read. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it, and found none. And he said to the vine dresser, Behold, these 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I find none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? And the vine dresser answered him, Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and put it on manure. Then if it should bear fruit next year, well and good, but if not, you can cut it down. The parson looked up at the congregation, his eyes twinkling with a deep understanding of the scripture. My dear friends, he began, today's passage teaches us about God's patience and grace with people. Just as the vine dresser interceded on behalf of the barren fig tree, asking for more time to nurture it, so too does God give us time to bear fruit in our lives. But just as the vine dresser ultimately expects the tree to produce fruit, so too does God expect us to produce good fruits. The parson's words struck a chord with Elizabeth, who had often found herself frustrated with her younger sister Lydia's frivolous behavior. She realized that, just as God was patient with her, she too needed to be patient with Lydia, giving her time and opportunities to grow and change. The parson continued, We are called to apply this principle in our relationships, to have a good opinion of others, just as God has a good opinion of us. We must invest in our relationships, nurturing and caring for them, just as the vine dresser tended to the fig tree. And just as the vine dresser did not give up on the tree immediately, we too must give people time to change, to bear fruit before we decide to cut them down. The cut, however, does not mean that we reject the person in concern, but it means that we deny the access of that person to our time, our finances, our devotion. We just set us free from that influence that steals our resources. However, our primary intention is that our relationships bestow us satisfaction and joy, and for that purpose, it is necessary to invest in them, sometimes even sacrifice something. Jane, who was sitting beside Elizabeth, smiled softly to herself. She had always been the peacemaker in the family, and the parson's words resonated deeply with her. She knew that, in her relationships with her sisters, she needed to be patient and understanding, giving them space to grow and learn. The parson's sermon went on to explain that, in families, it was not always possible to completely cut off a relationship, but that God had appointed authorities, such as parents and guardians, to help guide and correct those in their care. These authorities, he said, have the responsibility to ensure that those under their care are bearing good fruit and to take corrective action when necessary. As the sermon came to a close, the parson challenged the congregation to apply the principles of God's patience and grace in their relationships over the coming week. Let us strive to be like the vine dresser, he said, nurturing and caring for those around us, giving them time to grow and change. Let us have a good opinion of others and invest in our relationships, that we may bear good fruit and bring glory to God. The congregation erupted into a soft amen, and the Bennett family, along with the rest of the audience, left the church that morning with a renewed sense of purpose and commitment to cultivating healthy, fruitful relationships. As they walked home, Elizabeth turned to her sister Jane and smiled. "I feel like I have a lot to think about," she said. Jane nodded in agreement. "I do too," she replied, "but I'm grateful for the parson's reminder to be patient and understanding. I think it will make a big difference in our relationships, don't you?" Elizabeth nodded, and the two sisters walked on in comfortable silence, lost in their own thoughts and reflections on the parson's powerful sermon. Chapter 2. It was a typical Sunday afternoon at Longbourn, the Bennett family's estate. The family had just returned from church, where the parson's sermon had left a lasting impression on the younger members of the household. As they sat down to lunch, the discussion turned to the parson's words, and Lydia, the youngest Bennett sister, couldn't help but boast about her own behavior. "I did exactly as the parson said, Papa," Lydia exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I invested in my relationships by flirting with the militia officers, and I'm sure I'll reap a good fruit from it, a marriage to the best-looking man among them." The room fell silent, and Mr. Bennett's expression turned stern. He set down his fork and looked at Lydia, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and annoyance. "Lydia, my dear, you must not be so foolish," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Those militia officers may be charming and handsome, but they have hardly enough income to support themselves, let alone a wife and family. The life of a soldier's wife is not an easy one, and I will not allow you to condemn yourself to a life of poverty and hardship." Lydia's face fell, but she protested. "But Papa, I'm sure I can catch the eye of one of the officers and marry well. It's how I understood the sermon, after all." Mr. Bennett sighed, shaking his head. "The parson's words were meant to be taken in context, Lydia. He was speaking of the importance of living a virtuous life with good relationships, not encouraging young women to throw themselves at the first charming stranger who comes along. And as for marriage, it's not just a matter of catching someone's eye. It's a serious commitment that requires careful consideration and planning." He paused, looking around the table at his family. "The age of 21 is not just an arbitrary number, my dear children. It's a benchmark of maturity, a time when one is supposed to have gained enough wisdom and experience to make informed decisions about their life. People younger than that often make decisions based on temporary infatuations, and they bitterly regret them later on." Mrs. Bennett, who had been quietly observing the conversation, spoke up. "But Mr. Bennett, surely you're not saying that our daughters should be forced to marry old men. That's not fair to them." Mr. Bennett smiled wryly. "No, my dear, I'm saying that our daughters should be guided by wisdom and experience, not just their emotions. As their parents, it's our duty to ensure that they make good decisions that will bring them happiness and security in the long run. We must be involved in their marriage decisions, to offer our guidance and support, and to help them avoid the pitfalls of hasty and ill-considered matches." The table fell silent again, as the family digested Mr. Bennett's words. Lydia looked chastened, but also a little wiser, as if she was beginning to understand the importance of careful consideration and planning in matters of the heart. As they finished their lunch and the conversation turned to other topics, the Bennett family couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for Mr. Bennett's wisdom and guidance, and a renewed appreciation for the importance of family and responsibility. Chapter 3. It was a quiet afternoon at the Bennett household. the warm sunlight streaming through the windows as Elizabeth made her way to her father's room. She had been thinking a great deal about her younger sisters, Kitty and Lydia, and their behavior of late, which had been causing quite a stir in the family. Their lack of decorum and sense had been a worry for Elizabeth, and she felt it was high time someone took them in hand. As she entered her father's room, she found him sitting in his favorite armchair, a book in his lap. He looked up as she approached, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "Ah, Lizzie, come to speak with me, I presume," he said, setting his book aside. "I must say I'm intrigued. What's on your mind, my dear?" Elizabeth took a deep breath, launching into the matter that had been weighing on her mind. "Papa, I wanted to talk to you about Kitty and Lydia. Their behavior has been concerning, to say the least. I think it's time someone took responsibility for guiding them and teaching them some sense." Her father's expression turned thoughtful, and he nodded slowly. "I suppose you think I should be the one to take on that responsibility, don't you, Lizzie? After all, I am their father." Elizabeth nodded, expecting as much. "Yes, Papa, you are the one who should take charge of their upbringing. They're at an impressionable age, and if someone doesn't step in soon, they might develop habits that will be difficult to break later in life." Mr. Bennet leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with interest. "And what do you suggest I do, my dear? I must admit I've been rather indulgent with them of late. What remedy do you propose for their exuberance?" Elizabeth had given this a great deal of thought, and she was prepared with a solution. "Well, Papa, I think it would be wise to either hire a governess or send them to school. They've missed out on the guidance of the Gardners, which possibility Jane and I had, and I think it would do them a world of good to have some structure and discipline in their lives." Her father nodded thoughtfully, considering her words. "I see what you mean, Lizzie. You and Jane did benefit greatly from the Gardners' influence, didn't you? Very well, I shall speak with Kitty and Lydia and see which of the two alternatives would suit them best. Perhaps a governess would be the way to go, or maybe they would thrive in a school environment. I shall have to observe them and decide what's best for their future." Elizabeth felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was glad her father was taking her concerns seriously and was willing to take action. She knew that it wouldn't be an easy task, but she was confident that with her father's guidance, Kitty and Lydia could learn to behave in a more becoming manner. As she left her father's room, she felt hopeful that her younger sisters would soon be on the path to becoming respectable young women. Chapter 4. In the dim glow of a single candle, Mr. Thomas Bennet sat at his desk in the Longbourn study, the weight of the Sunday sermon still lingering in his mind. The minister's words about the patient vine dresser and the unfruitful fig tree had struck him odd. "Cut it down," the owner had said. "Why should it use up the ground?" The response, the vine dresser's plea for more time, for nourishment and care, coiled into Mr. Bennet's thoughts with an insistence he could not ignore. He glanced out the window. The winter moon hung low, its pale light reflecting on the frost-rimmed glass, as though the world itself waited in quiet patience. His quill hovered over the page, unused. He had meant to draft a letter to his solicitor, but the parable had rooted itself in his mind. His wife, had he not, in his own way, declared her a barren tree? The acrid memory of their last argument surfaced, her shrieks about Mary's botched piano practice, his sharp retort about her loudness. The silence that followed had been heavier than the argument itself. In that silence he had retreated to his study as he always did, leaving her to her frustrations. But was withdrawal not its own kind of axe? He leaned back, rubbing his temples. 24 years of marriage had not softened his view of her. Mrs. Bennet's vulgar gestures, the way she interrupted his books, her exaggerated sympathy for hopeless romances, her ceaseless fretting over the daughter's matches, had grown more grating with each year. Yet the sermon had planted a seed. What of the roots? What soil had he fostered? A memory surfaced. Their wedding day, perhaps, though time had blurred it. He recalled a woman with warm eyes, her laughter not so shrill then, her beauty lively rather than desperate. She had been 17 when he wed her face already marked by a quiet kindness. Not only an external beauty, but a glow from within. Even now, she still cooked his favorite barley soup when his cough lingered. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair over with a clatter. The candle sputtered. It was these small things, the soup, the laughter, the way she still clasped her hands in hope when speaking of their youngest, Lydia's fine figure, that the years had nearly drowned. Mr. Bennet found his wife in the parlor, mending Lydia's frock. Her hair was loose, a few strands silvered, her face drawn with exhaustion. He paused. She looked up, startled. "Thomas? Is anything the matter?" "Nothing at all," he said, crossing the room with deliberate slowness. She stiffened as though bracing for a reprimand. He stopped beside her. "You have a steady hand with a needle. That mending is quite fine." A beat of surprise. "Why, thank you. I didn't think you'd notice." Her eyes glistened. He cleared his throat, the words feeling awkward, foreign. "You do it well. You've always been attentive to the children's comforts." She smiled, a soft ripple across her face that made her look younger. "I was just thinking how large Lydia's getting. She'll be a beauty, won't she?" Her voice took on its usual fervor, and he almost flinched. But he stayed, listening. "Yes," he said, "she will." Mr. Bennet started to observe his wife more. He noted the hush in his wife's voice as she sent the housekeeper to the poor widow across the lane with a casserole. He saw the way she lingered at the pianoforte, not to scold Mary, but to hum along with her halting scales. He even overheard her quiet prayers by the sick servant's bed, her tears genuine, not performative. Next morning, he joined her in the breakfast room before the family rose. "I prefer black tea with a bit of milk," he remarked, watching her pour. She blinked. "You do?" "I had forgotten. I am sorry. I used to keep it separate for you." "No need. I only thought to mention it." He hesitated. "You brew a very fine tea, by the way." This time she laughed outright, a rich, warm sound. "You flatter me, Thomas." But her cheeks pinked with pleasure. At dinner, when Mrs. Bennet erupted about Mr. Collins' visit, Mr. Bennet felt the old irritation rise. "Must he stay for a month?" she wailed. "I cannot abide his pompous face another hour." He steepled his fingers, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "His company is tedious, yes, but we must consider his gratitude for the patronage." She stared at him. "You are not chafing at his visits?" "I have not said a word to the contrary." Her eyes narrowed, then softened. "Oh, Thomas, I declare you are being very mysterious today." She reached across the table, patted his hand. "But I approve." As he walked with his wife in the afternoon, long after their children had scattered to their own pursuits, she looped her arm through his. "You have taken quite a fancy to philosophy, Thomas, with all this tending and pruning." He glanced at her. Is it so unusual? I thought you only had eyes for your books. Books can't tend a fig tree. No, she said, squeezing his arm, but you can. Her laugh returned, not shrill, but mellow, like tea. Though I must say, I rather like the pruning. Chapter 5. The autumnal sun cast a honeyed glow over the lawns of Netherfield Park, where golden leaves skittered across the gravel paths like whispered secrets. Inside the grand estate, Mr. Charles Bingley sat in the morning room, his mind with Miss Jane Bennet, whose gentle smile had lingered in his thoughts since their last meeting at the Meryton assembly. The door opened quietly, and Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy entered. Tall, composed, and bearing the quiet gravity of one who carried the weight of responsibility, as naturally as breath, he moved with measured grace. Without ceremony, he took a seat opposite Bingley. "You seem preoccupied, Charles," Darcy observed, his voice low and even. Bingley sighed. "Am I so transparent?" "To those who know you well," Darcy replied, a faint hint of a smile touching his lips. "And to me especially. You've been restless all morning, fidgeting with your gloves, staring out the window, and now abandoning Fordyce for reverie. It is Miss Bennet again, is it not?" Bingley did not deny it. "I cannot help it, Darcy. She is the most amiable woman I've ever known. There is a sweetness in her nature, a sincerity that I find rare." Darcy leaned forward slightly. "Then why do you hesitate?" I do not know. I feel I must be cautious. Her family, her connections, they are not what one might expect. And yet," Bingley continued, "when I am with her, such considerations fade. Her happiness, her regard, it makes me feel more certain than I have ever been." Darcy was silent a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Then permit me to speak plainly, as a friend." "Please do." "Last Sunday," Darcy began, "we heard the parson at the village church deliver a sermon on the parable of the fig tree. You recall it, perhaps?" Bingley nodded slowly. "I recall it. A lesson on patience and on accountability." "Precisely," said Darcy, "and it struck me as I listened how apt it is to our current situation. Charles, you have planted your affections in Miss Bennet. You have visited Longbourn, danced with her at every ball, walked with her in the garden, spoken of her in glowing terms. Indeed, you have cultivated that relationship as diligently as any gardener tending a young sapling." "I have cared for her," Bingley said softly. "Indeed you have. But a tree grown to bear fruit serves no purpose if no one reaps the harvest. To invest time, attention, and affection, only to step back and leave the fruit to rot on the bough, is not prudence. It is neglect. Worse, it is cruelty disguised as kindness." Bingley looked up sharply. "Cruelty? Do you not see, Charles? Jane Bennet is no fool. She has received your attentions, warm, consistent, and public. She has, I believe, allowed herself to hope. A woman of her decency will not voice expectation, but the absence of closure wounds more deeply than rejection. If you care for her, propose. If you do not, then withdraw with sincerity, not silence." Bingley stared into the fireplace, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "You believe she returns my affection?" "I do. Her reserve is natural, bred in the quiet dignity of her character. But her eyes speak when her lips do not, and the way she listens when you speak, as though your words are music to her soul. Yes, Charles, she hopes, and hope unattended becomes disappointment." A long silence settled between them. At length Bingley spoke. I had thought to lay a sign of prudence, that I should ensure my feelings were true, that I did not act rashly. And prudent you were, Darcy acknowledged. But prudence has its season. So does harvest. To wait until the fruit falls and spoils is not wisdom, it is waste. Bingley stood abruptly, crossing to the window. Outside, a gardener was pruning the rose bushes, careful not to damage the roots. If I proposed, he said, and she accepted, what of your reservations? About her family? Darcy rose as well. My reservations are mine to bear, not yours. I gave you counsel, not command. But this I know, you are not a man to trifle with hearts. If you love her, honor that love. If you do not, honor her by honesty. He placed a hand on Bingley's shoulder. Do not let the fruit of your affection rot for fear of picking it, Charles. Either tend the tree or cut it down. But do not let it wither in neglect. Bingley turned, his face resolute. Then I shall ride to Longbourn tomorrow. Darcy inclined his head. As you should. And as the autumn light deepened into evening, Bingley felt something long uncertain settle within him. Not with the thunder of revelation, but with the quiet clarity of a truth long overlooked. Love, like fruit, is meant to be gathered before it is lost to the wind. And so, beneath the boughs of a future as yet unformed, one man resolved at last to reap what he had sown. Chapter 6. Darcy turned his head, his eyes catching the glint of a distant shepherd's dog bounding across the meadow. In a voice that was calm as the still surface of a pond, yet undercut with steel, he replied, You must decide, Mr. Bingley, whether you wish to be a man or a son. The point, sir, Bingley said, fidgeting with the cuff of his coat, is that Caroline is not a mere sister. She is, as you know, a woman of great imagination. And when I think of her standing there, a light of triumph in her eyes, as though my hand were her own triumph, I wonder how she would receive the notion that my affection is turned to Jane. Darcy's gaze fell upon the fig tree, where the foliage seemed to whisper in a language only the wind understood. You must not allow your sister to reign over your life, he said, for a man's authority is his own. You must begin to dig around her life, as the gardener does when he tends a fig tree, carefully, with intention, and when necessary, with an axe. Bingley stared, bewildered. But an axe? She would be hurt. Darcy lifted his hand as if to steady the very air, and spoke of the sermon delivered the previous Sunday by the village parson, a man whose voice had always seemed to carry a hint of something prophetic. The parson told the congregation a parable of a fig tree. He said that a farmer, having planted a fig sapling, allowed it to grow unchecked. The branches spread, the roots tangled, and the fruit never ripened. At last he took a spade and began to dig around the base, loosening the earth, removing weeds, and when some branches grew too wild, he cut them away. Only then did the tree bear fruit in abundance. He paused, allowing the silence to settle on the garden like a soft blanket. Your sister, Caroline, has her own ambitions, her own desires for you. Perhaps she sees your happiness as a prize she may keep. Yet if you do not prune the overgrowth of her expectations, you will never have a chance to produce the fruit you so desire, your marriage to Jane. It may hurt her, but it is necessary. Should she refuse to accept the order you impose, you must cut the proximity that binds you. The wind sighed through the fig leaves, making them rustle like soft applause. Bingley's heart pounded. He imagined his sister's graceful smile, her laughter that had once warmed his mornings, now twisted into a frown of disapproval. Yet the image of that parson's tale, the deliberate gardener, resonated with a power he had not anticipated. It was a picture of love that required work, of relationships that required both nurturing and discipline. "Mr. Darcy," he whispered, "what then is the first step?" "You speak to her as you would to any plant that has outgrown its pot," Darcy said, his voice now softer, as though he were addressing a tender bloom. "You must be gentle but firm. Begin with words that reveal your gratitude for her care and affection. Then, like the gardener's spade, you must clear a path for your own intentions. Speak plainly of your affection for Miss Bennet and of your desire to marry her. Let her understand that this is not a rejection of her, but a reordering and even turning around of both of your lives, even removing the weeds, the false ways that have stuck in your relationship with her." Bingley inhaled a breath of the late summer air, filling his lungs with the scent of clover and earth, and felt a strange steadiness settle over him. He imagined the moment when he would stand before Caroline, his voice steady and his eyes clear, while his heart beat with the certainty of a man who had taken the spade and set to work. Chapter 7. Bingley, with his usual affable demeanor, turned to Darcy and asked, "What about you? Have you invested in your felicity with Elizabeth, my dear fellow?" Darcy, taken aback by the question, hesitated for a moment before responding. "I must confess I have developed strong feelings for her," Darcy said, his voice laced with a mix of emotions. "I am willing to sacrifice my expectations about wealth and connections, to overlook her family's inferior social standing, and to ignore her vulgar relations." He paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "I assumed that my love and devotion would be enough to win her heart." Bingley's expression turned solemn, and he leaned forward in his chair. "Darcy, my friend, you are totally self-centered," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You have not invested in the relationship itself, but rather in your own desires and expectations. You have poisoned the very foundation of your connection with Elizabeth by insulting her and showcasing your haughty and superior demeanor." Darcy's face fell, and he looked away, his eyes narrowing as he reflected on Bingley's words. He had never considered that his behavior might be perceived as self-centered or insulting. In his mind, he had been acting out of a sense of duty and responsibility, trying to protect himself and his family from the inferior connections that the Bennet family represented. Bingley continued, his words piercing the silence. "If Elizabeth were to accept your proposal in this situation, she would indeed be mercenary. But because she is not, she will not accept. She values her self-respect and dignity above all else, and she will not compromise those principles for the sake of material comfort or social standing." Darcy felt a pang of regret and sorrow. He realized that Bingley was right. He had been so focused on his own feelings and desires that he had neglected to consider Elizabeth's perspective, her feelings, and her needs. He had assumed that his love and devotion would be enough, without making any effort to understand her, or to build a genuine connection with her. As the truth of Bingley's words sank in, Darcy's expression changed from one of defensiveness to one of introspection. He began to see himself and his actions in a new light, and he was not pleased with what he saw. He thought back to their first meeting, to the way he had dismissed her as not handsome enough to tempt him, and to the way he had treated her with disdain and condescension. "I must confess, there remains much to do," Darcy said, his voice barely above a whisper. I have been blind to my own flaws and shortcomings. I plan to offer a sincere apology to Elizabeth for my behavior, to acknowledge my mistakes and to make amends. I hope that it is not too late, that she will be willing to listen and to give me another chance." Bingley nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It is never too late to make amends, Darcy, but you must be genuine in your approach, and you must be willing to listen to her and to understand her perspective. You must be prepared to put in the effort to rebuild trust and to establish a true connection with her." Darcy nodded, feeling a sense of determination and resolve. He knew that he had a long and difficult road ahead of him, but he was willing to take the first step, to apologize and to make amends. He hoped that Elizabeth would be willing to forgive him and to give him another chance, but he was prepared to accept her decision, whatever it may be. As the conversation drew to a close, Darcy stood up, his eyes locked on Bingley's. "Thank you, my friend," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have opened my eyes to my own flaws and shortcomings. I will not forget your words, and I will strive to become a better man, a man worthy of Elizabeth's love and respect." Bingley smiled, his eyes shining with warmth and approval. "I have no doubt that you will, Darcy. You have the capacity to grow and to learn, and I have every confidence that you will emerge from this experience a wiser and more compassionate person." As Darcy left the room, he felt a sense of hope and renewal. He knew that he had a long journey ahead of him, but he was ready to take the first step, to embark on a path of self-discovery and growth. He was ready to learn from his mistakes, to listen to others, and to become a better man, a man worthy of Elizabeth's love and respect. Chapter 8. The drawing room of Longbourn was hushed, its great windows dimmed by the deepening dusk. A thin veil of mist had begun to curl over the gardens, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint perfume of night-blooming roses. Inside, the fire crackled, its amber flames throwing soft shadows upon the upholstered chairs and the polished mahogany table that lay between two sisters, each bent over a slender volume of paper. Elizabeth glanced up from her book and saw that the light in her sister's eyes flickered like the candles in the fireplace. Jane, ever the picture of calm, had set her tea aside, her hands wrapped around the teacup as though she were cradling a secret. "The parson's words struck me oddly," Elizabeth said, her voice a mixture of amusement and earnestness. "He spoke of the fig tree, how it bears fruit only when it is tended with patience and purpose, how a gardener who neglects his vines will find them barren." She paused, searching her sister's expression for a hint of the reaction she expected. It seemed, I think, also a warning about love. If you wish to see a relationship flourish, you must plant it deliberately, nurture it, and— She let the sentence hang. "Show your feelings, dear Jane. If you truly love Mr. Bingley, you ought to make your affection evident, lest the fruit of marriage remain forever out of reach." Jane's eyebrows rose in gentle surprise, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Lizzie, I have always believed that love should blossom in its own time, that the heart ought not be forced. Yet the parson's metaphor has a certain persuasiveness. You suggest I should be more proactive?" Elizabeth inclined her head, the firelight catching the iron glint in her eyes. "I do. Love, like any garden, does not grow from silence alone. If you keep your admiration hidden, you place the very seeds of doubt into Bingley's mind. He might think you are indifferent, and then Then he may turn his attention elsewhere, Jane finished, her voice soft but resolute. You are right in principle, but it would be a sacrifice for me. I have always shied from overt displays. I fear that overt enthusiasm might appear as desperation, a quality I dread to seem. A smile curved Elizabeth's mouth, not one of mockery, but of affection. You would not be desperate, dear sister, merely honest. Your shy nature makes this an arduous task. I grant you that. Yet consider the parson's fig tree once more. The gardener does not uproot the tree because it is stubborn. He prunes, he waters, he clears away the weeds. Perhaps you need only a small, deliberate gesture, one that speaks of your affection without drowning it in extravagance. Jane lifted her teacup, its porcelain rim catching the fire's glow, and set it down with a delicate clink. I shall try, then. I shall think of a way to let Mr. Bingley perceive my feelings. Perhaps a walk in the garden at twilight. A quiet conversation beside the fountain. Something gentle yet unmistakable. It will be a trial, but I shall do my utmost. Elizabeth nodded, pleased, and the sisters fell into a brief silence, each lost in thoughts of blooming fruit and whispered promises. The crackling fire seemed to breathe life into the room, as if urging them forward. It was then that Jane, after a moment's hesitation, turned her gaze to Elizabeth with a different intensity. And what of Mr. Darcy? Do you still harbor that? She trailed off, the words hanging like a leaf trembling on a branch. Elizabeth's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her features. She had spoken of Darcy with sharpness at many a dinner and soiree. The memory of his haughty dismissal at Netherfield, his cruel remark about being a single man of good family, still burned in her mind. Yet she knew Jane's heart was kind, her capacity for forgiveness boundless. Yes, Elizabeth finally whispered, my disdain for him has not entirely faded. He has wounded me with his pride and his unkindness. The parson's sermon, remember the gardener's example? He did not merely tend to those who appreciated his care. He also tended to the wild stalks that threatened to choke the orchard. I have been tempted to withhold my compassion, to let his arrogance root deeper. Jane smiled, a warmth suffusing her voice. Lizzie, the gardener in the parable, did not merely prune the healthy branches, but he also cleared away the thorns that choked the fig's growth. He did it for the good of the whole orchard, not out of spite. Should we not, then, extend that same mercy to Mr. Darcy? Not for his sake alone, but for ours, so that we may be freed from the weight of resentment. Elizabeth stared into the fire, the flames licking the darkness, casting a glow upon the iron-wrought railing of her thoughts. You would have me forgive him? To think that a man so haughty could be coaxed into humility? She laughed, a sound tinged with both irony and genuine curiosity. I would have you be gracious as the gardener, steady, patient, unflinching, Jane replied, her words carrying the cadence of a hymn. His insult was a moment of frustration, a thorn that pierced our hearts. Yet if we cut it away with forgiveness, we offer him space to change. We do not deny the pain he caused, but we do not let it bind us either. By extending compassion, we may guide him toward a gentler path, perhaps even loosen the rigid posture that he wears like armor. Elizabeth's mouth twitched, the familiar stubbornness of her nature battling the quiet voice of reason that Jane's counsel summoned. You speak of a gardener who offers a second chance to a fruitless fig tree. Yet what if the vine refuses to bend? What if his pride remains unyielding? Jane set her hand lightly on Elizabeth's. the gesture warm and grounding. Even a stubborn vine will eventually bend under the gentle, persistent pull of a tender gardener. It is not the act of yielding that should frighten us, but the fear of remaining entangled in bitterness. By forgiving, we free ourselves first. The man may follow or may not. In either case, we are unburdened. A hush fell between them, punctuated only by the occasional sigh of the wind through the open window. The scent of the garden rose faintly, a reminder of the very fig tree the parson had spoken of, its leaves quivering in the night air. Elizabeth's gaze softened. "Very well, Jane. I will think upon this. Perhaps I shall write a letter, a modest one, not a confession of love nor a rebuke, but a note of peace or some kind of expression of forgiveness, something that would open a door for a future conversation without the weight of recrimination. I shall see whether the gardener's patience might in time coax even a thicket of pride into bloom." Jane's eyes glittered with admiration. "That would be the most graceful step, dear sister. It will not be easy, but it shall be true to the spirit of the parson's teaching." As the clock in the hallway told the hour, a soft chime resonated through the house, echoing the rhythm of a heartbeat and the steady march of time. Elizabeth and Jane rose, their silhouettes framed by the fading light. They walked together to the garden, their steps quiet on the gravel path. A fig tree stood majestically near the fountain, its branches heavy with the promise of ripening fruit. The tree's leaves rustled, a gentle murmur that seemed to whisper encouragement. Elizabeth reached out, her fingertips brushing a low-hanging leaf. "It is strange," she mused, "how a simple sermon can plant such thoughts in our minds. The parson's words have become a mirror for our own hearts, showing us where we must tend and prune." Jane placed her hand upon the trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath her palm. "And the garden is a living testament to the truths we carry within. As we tend to it, so too must we nurture the gardens of our relationships with patience, with honesty, and with the willingness to forgive." A sudden breeze carried a flurry of blossoms across the stone path, scattering them like golden coins at their feet. The sisters paused, each picking up a blossom and tucking it gently into the pocket of her dress, a token of the night's contemplation, a reminder of the fig tree's lesson. The fire in the drawing room had long since died down, but the ember of their conversation glowed brighter than any flame. As they returned to Longbourn, their hearts were lighter, their minds clearer. Elizabeth, with the fresh resolve of a gardener, sensed that the fields of her affection for both Bingley and Darcy would require careful sowing. She could not force the blossoms to appear, but she could lay the groundwork through small gestures for Bingley, through a gesture of peace for Darcy, trusting that the fig tree would, in its own season, yield its fruit. Jane, ever the gentle arboretum of kindness, was content to watch her sister's resolve take root. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, yet also with the hopeful promise that every heart, however tangled, could find its way to light if tended with love and patience. The night deepened, and above Longbourn 1,000 stars flickered, a celestial fig tree bearing the fruit of constellations, each one a reminder that even the most distant hopes could, with diligent care, become within reach. In the quiet of that evening, two sisters, bound not only by blood, but by a shared reverence for wisdom, stepped forward, each a gardener of her own destiny, each ready to nurture the gardens of love, forgiveness, and future possibility. The fig tree, standing sentinel, seemed to sigh in approval, its branches rustling a gentle hymn of hope that would echo through the halls of Longbourn for many seasons to come. Chapter 9. The gravel crunched beneath his boots with such ferocity that small stones shot into the air like tiny, indignant projectiles. Mr. William Collins strode from Longbourn with the rigid posture of a man who had not merely been refused, but grievously insulted by the very order of nature. His cravat, always impeccably tied, seemed to constrict tighter than before, as if his own garments conspired to convey the indignation he could no longer contain. "How dared she?" he muttered aloud, though there was no one to hear but the wind and the cawing crow that perched atop the gatepost. How dared Miss Elizabeth Bennet, plain, unadorned Miss Bennet, mock a clergyman so brazenly, and one so closely connected to the great house of Rosings at that? He clutched his hat with white-knuckled fury. The memory of Elizabeth's composed refusal, delivered with a tone that hovered between amusement and pity, seared his mind. She had not even trembled when she said, "I am very sensible of the honor of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than to decline them." Decline them, not regretfully decline, nor with deep sorrow. No, a flat, unfeeling decline, as though she were refusing a second cup of tea. And then she had invoked the parable of the fig tree, citing last Sunday's sermon. She had looked him in the eye and said, "I fear, Mr. Collins, that no fruit can grow on stones." That remark, oh, that frightful, impudent remark, had struck him harder than any physical blow. Was he a stone? Was he barren? Was he not a man of standing, soon to be master of Longbourn by inheritance? Did he not possess the patronage of the illustrious Lady Catherine de Bourgh? Had he not composed sermons so moving even the stable boy wept in the back pew? And yet Elizabeth Bennet had spoken those words with a smile. Yes, a smile, as if she were exchanging pleasantries about the weather. Worse still, when Mr. Bennet had been consulted, that distant, mocking father had laughed, and said his daughter's sentiments were binding, and he would never force her, as if filial duty were a matter of whimsy. Mr. Collins quickened his pace, his face flushing beneath his wig. He reviewed the facts, as he often did in times of agitation, to restore order to his disordered mind. Fact 1. He had offered marriage with the highest regard for propriety and social duty. Fact 2. Miss Elizabeth Bennet had refused him, publicly, unapologetically. Fact 3. Her family had not only tolerated this affront, but endorsed it. Fact 4. There was now a vacancy where his future had once stood, neatly planned, properly documented, divinely sanctioned. He stopped abruptly beneath a gnarled oak tree, breathing heavily. "Such ingratitude," he whispered, "such unparalleled obstinacy." He could not fathom it. Elizabeth had rejected him before he had even fully revealed the depth of his intentions. She had not paused to consider the advantages, the estate, the connection to Rosings, the security. She had not blushed and demurred, asking for time to pray on it. She had said no as though refusing a walk in the garden. "Foolish girl," he groaned. "Blind, foolish creature. She does not understand the value of a position so dignified. She would have been mistress of Longbourn. She would have sat at the head of the table at Christmas. And she spurned it for what? Fancy? Nonsense." He began to pace again, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "And now what?" he demanded of the empty lane. "Where am I to find a suitable bride?" He paused, a sudden thought occurring. Could Elizabeth truly be mad? Was it possible her mind was touched? That explained the lack of reverence, the irreverent quotation of scripture against him. Perhaps she suffered from melancholia or vapors. He recalled reading of such conditions in The Complete Physician. Yes, that must be it. No rational woman would refuse him. But even this theory brought him little comfort, for it still left him without a bride. Chapter 10. The spring afternoon in Hertfordshire was balmy, the sunlight spilling through the drawing-room windows like liquid gold. Charlotte Lucas sat by her friend Elizabeth Bennet, her embroidery needle still in the linen cloth she had been attempting to stitch. Her gaze, however, was fixed on the garden beyond the window, where the orderly rows of lilies and tulips seemed to mock her own disordered thoughts. "You must admit, Lizzie," Charlotte began, her voice tinged with resignation, "I am positively at an impasse. At 27 I am no longer a girl, and the few gentlemen who do condescend to pay attention to me are either too poor to support a wife or too fond of their own opinions to make a suitable partner." She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Surely you agree that a woman's prospects dwindle with each passing season." Elizabeth, who had been perusing a volume of poetry, looked up with a sympathetic smile. "You grow too severe, Charlotte. There are still gentlemen of sense and substance in Hertfordshire, perhaps not as many as there were when we were 17, but enough." "Sense and substance," Charlotte echoed, a dry note in her tone. "I should be grateful for a man of either. But where is the man who possesses both?" Elizabeth set down the book and turned fully towards Charlotte, her green eyes bright with sudden inspiration. "Have you considered Mr. Collins?" Charlotte's head snapped around so quickly that her curls trembled. "William Collins? Your cousin? Good heavens, Lizzie, he is as dull as a sermon without the moral." "He is honorably dull," Elizabeth countered, suppressing a laugh. "And the heir to Longbourn, as you well know. He has a decent fortune, a title of sorts, though I dare say reverend is not a title one would wear with pride, and a heart, I believe, that is entirely amiable." Charlotte's brows furrowed. "He is a clergyman, Lizzie. With all due respect, his conversations are as unvarying as the tides." "And yet," Elizabeth said, leaning forward, "he is here in Hertfordshire, and I dare say he would be most flattered if you paid him some attention. It would solve both your dilemmas." Charlotte's fingers tightened around the embroidery needle. Mr. Collins was a man of portly figure, florid complexion, and a voice that rose and fell like a church bell, solemn, sonorous, and difficult to ignore. But as Elizabeth's cousin and the eventual heir to the Bennet estate, he was tethered to their lives like a weight on a rope. Still, the suggestion lingered. Charlotte's mother had often warned that a woman's future depended not on love, but on calculations. A roof over one's head, a steady income, and a husband who would not squander his fortune in the gambling halls of London. Those were the pillars of a secure life. Mr. Collins, for all his deficiencies, seemed to occupy all three. "Very well," Charlotte said at last, her tone measured. "If you believe he might be amenable." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with triumph. "He respects me. I shall speak on your behalf." The following hours became a quiet campaign of strategy. Charlotte, recalling the parson's sermon on Sunday, the one about patient cultivation bearing fruit, adopted its philosophy with religious fervor. She began with small gestures, a warm greeting when she met Mr. Collins, a compliment on his waistcoat, a sympathetic nod when he rambled about Lady Catherine de Bourgh, his formidable patroness. He responded with the enthusiasm of a man who believed himself rescued from obscurity. "Miss Lucas," he proclaimed at one gathering, his beet-red face glowing, "your kindness is a beacon to this humble servant. I am but a sapling in the shadow of greater oaks, yet your light encourages me to reach for the heavens." Charlotte managed to smile. "Your metaphors are particularly poetic today, sir." "Poetic?" Mr. Collins blinked. "Ah, I strive to emulate the great orators of the church, though I fear I am but a child playing with thunder." When Elizabeth suggested a more formal approach, Charlotte devised a plan: an evening dinner at Longbourn. "A private setting will encourage conversation," she told Elizabeth, who concealed her amusement behind a teacup, "and fewer listeners mean fewer opportunities for awkwardness." The evening arrived, and Charlotte donned a pale blue gown, its modest elegance meant to impress without overwhelming. Mr. Collins, when he arrived, appeared both flustered and elated, his cravat tied with a precision that suggested hours of practice. Dinner was a delicate dance. Charlotte smiled when he spoke, which was often, and nodded when he waxed lyrical on the virtues of Lady Catherine's gardens or the importance of diligence in one's vocation. She asked questions about his parish, his books, his future plans. Mr. Collins, delighted by the attention, filled the air with monologues that could have been mistaken for sermons. At one point, as he described his plans to build a new chapel in his future parish, Charlotte interjected, "It is admirable, Mr. Collins, that you wish to improve the lives of your congregation. Few clergymen consider their flock's comfort as you do." "Ah," he beamed, his chest puffing out, "I am but a humble instrument of divine providence. Lady Catherine, of course, has often guided my hand. She is a woman of unparalleled wisdom and generosity," Charlotte added. Chapter 11. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Hertfordshire like a silken veil, and the first light of dawn gilded the world in the hues of gold and rose. Elizabeth Bennet, wrapped in a cloak of faded blue, ascended the path to Oakham Mount with a heart both light and restless. It was her sanctuary, this vantage point where the earth seemed to cradle the horizon, and the troubles of Longbourn dissolved into the vastness of the sky. Yet today, as she reached the summit, her steps faltered. Somewhere beyond the gnarled oak trees, a figure sat motionless on a fallen tree trunk, the stillness of it incongruous with the rustling leaves and chirping birds. "Mr. Darcy!" she exclaimed, the surprise evident in her voice. He turned, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pause. The fallen tree between them seemed to stretch wider, a chasm of unspoken words. He stood slowly, his tall frame rigid, as if the weight of propriety and pride had returned to claim him. Yet his voice, when he spoke, was softer than she had ever heard it. "I beg your pardon for this intrusion, Miss Bennet. I saw you from below and—" He hesitated, then gestured to the tree. "Might we sit? There is something I must say." Elizabeth, curious and wary, lowered herself to the mossy ground. The mist had thinned, and now sunlight spilled over the fields, illuminating the furrow in his brow. She had expected perhaps a continuation of the civility they had exchanged at the assembly, but the gravity in his tone hinted at something far deeper. "I attended the parson's sermon on Sunday as well," he began, his fingers kneading the bark of the tree. "The parable of the fig tree, it troubled me. The gardener's plea for patience, the warning of what comes when fruit is not born. I have given much thought to its meaning, and I came to understand that I have in my own life failed to nurture what was once entrusted to me." He looked up, his gaze steady. I refer, of course, to my conduct toward you. My words at the assembly, my presumption in speaking of your family, my arrogance in believing I could judge you. It was unworthy. I see now how my pride has blinded me, and I come here as a man seeking forgiveness. Elizabeth's breath caught. The vehemence of his apology, the humility in his tone, was so unlike the man she had believed him to be. Yet even as her heart softened, another memory surfaced. The tale of Mr. Wickham, the injury in his voice when he spoke of Darcy's cruelty. She met his eyes again. You speak of the fig tree, sir, but what of Mr. Wickham? How is it that you denied him his living, left him to ruin? That I find most difficult to forgive. A shadow crossed Darcy's face, and for a moment he seemed to wrestle with his words. Then, as if releasing a burden he had borne for years, he began. Wickham was my father's godson, a man I was raised to treat as a brother. When my father died, he was left a legacy, a sum sufficient for his education and entry into the clergy. But he squandered it, dissipated it in London, and came to me in Hertfordshire, seeking more. I offered him twice the original amount on the condition that he pursue ordination. He accepted, and I procured the living. He paused, choosing his words carefully. At a parish near Derbyshire. But Wickham, instead of preparing for holy orders, indulged in cards and wine. When I confronted him, he begged for more funds, and I gave them. I paid his debts in Lambton, in London, even in Meryton. I gave him years, Miss Bennet, time enough to repent, to change. His voice wavered. But the tree I see now was barren all along. Elizabeth's heart pounded. The man she had admired for his charm, the gentleman her father had praised, was a fraud, a man who had manipulated not only Darcy, but everyone he met. She stared at the man before her, the stiff, aloof Mr. Darcy transformed into something else, a man worn by the weight of his own compassion. And to think, she whispered, I believed you the villain and him adequate at playing one, Darcy finished bitterly. I see now that my lenity was weakness. I hoped to be generous, but I only enabled his wickedness. The parson's parable, it has made me see that I must no longer delay the cut. A silence fell between them, broken only by the caw of a distant rook. Elizabeth's mind raced. Wickham's flirtations at the Meryton assembly, his easy smiles, the signs had all been there. And yet she had clung to her prejudice against Darcy, never questioning the source of her own judgments. Then, she said slowly, if you wish to act, it is not too late. If there is a way to prevent further harm, there is, Darcy said, his voice resolute. As I told you, I have been paying his debts, so I am able to put him in debtor's prison. He will no longer seek to ingratiate himself with your family. Elizabeth nodded, a strange mix of sorrow and relief in her chest. It is done then, she said. For a moment, Darcy only looked at her, the distance between them now bridged by something unspoken. Then, as if realizing the weight of her presence, he rose abruptly. I have taken too much of your time, Miss Bennet. I should go. But Elizabeth stood as well, her heart suddenly afraid of his departure. Mr. Darcy, she hesitated, then met his eyes. Is there not something more you wish to say? He stared at her, and for the first time she saw not just the proud gentleman, but the man beneath. The man who had wrestled with his own failings, who had come to her with his heart laid bare. And as the sunlight fully broke over the hills, he spoke. There is, he said, his voice low. I came not only to apologize, Miss Bennet, but to confess. I have not been able to cease thinking of you since the first moment I saw you at that damned assembly. You cut through my pride like none other. And though I dare not hope, I cannot help but believe that if you could perhaps bear to think of me kindly, I might be a happier man than I have ever been. Elizabeth's breath stilled. The man who had once seemed so insurmountably aloof now stood before her, a tangle of vulnerability and hope. And though the words were not what she had expected, they were enough. Mr. Darcy, she said softly, I think you are a man worth knowing better. And I confess, I have little patience for those who do not seek to change. A smile flickered on his lips, tentative but radiant. Then I shall endeavor to be a better man, Miss Bennet, for your sake, and for whatever fig trees may yet remain. As they walked down the hill together, the world seemed brighter, as if the sun itself had been waiting for this moment to shine through. And though the shadows of Wickham and past prejudices lingered, they were small beneath the vast expanse of a future untold. Chapter 12. It was a crisp Sunday morning in Meryton, the kind where the dew still clung to the grass as the townsfolk made their way, slowly and solemnly, toward the whitewashed spire of the parish church. The gilded sun rose above the hedgerows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the sanctuary like penitent hands. The pews, worn smooth by generations of feet, creaked as families settled in, some eager, others merely dutiful. Reverend Williams, the parson of Meryton, stood at the pulpit, his hands resting lightly on the worn leather Bible before him. He had long been admired not for his flamboyance, but for the gentle, truthful cadence of his voice, a voice that carried weight without thunder. My dear friends, he began, I imagine you have each had an eventful week. A ripple of murmurs passed through the congregation. Heads turned subtly. Eyes exchanged glances, some knowing, some cautious. I say this not to pry, he continued, but because I have observed, indeed we all have, how human lives, even in the quietest of villages, are stirred by events both joyful and grievous. And I believe in this we may find a reflection of a truth found in Scripture, specifically in the parable of the fig tree. That was my message last Sunday, and I challenged you to seek for applications in your relationships. He paused, allowing the silence to gather his thoughts. You recall it, no doubt. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit, but found none. So he said to the gardener, See, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? But the gardener said to him, Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you may cut it down. The parson let the words hang, like incense drifting through the rafters. We often miss the tenderness hidden in this parable, he said. Yes, there is judgment, but first there is patience, there is effort, there is investment. The gardener does not abandon the tree, he digs around it, he loosens the hardened soil, he nourishes it. Why? Because he believes it can bear fruit, because he wants it to bear fruit. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze sweeping across the pews. And beloved, this is how our relationship with God is meant to be. He has invested everything in us, time, grace, mercy. He did not spare his only son, but gave him up for us all. That is the depth of his desire for relationship with us. A soft gasp escaped Mrs. Bennet's lips. She quickly pressed her hand to her mouth, but her eyes remained wide. But we, the parson went on, we are often hard soil. Arrogance seals our hearts like compacted earth. Fear buries the seeds before they can sprout. Hatred, bitterness, unforgiveness. These are the weeds that choke out the life meant to grow in us. He paused, then added more tenderly, and sometimes God allows trials, upheavals, heartbreaks, disappointments, not because he delights in our pain, but because he longs for our hearts to break open. Like the gardener who plows the field, turning soil that has grown stale and stubborn, God may allow our lives to be turned upside down, not to destroy us, but to prepare us. A woman in the third row dabbed at her eyes. Elizabeth Bennet, seated beside her sisters, sat very still. Her fingers were clasped tightly in her lap. She thought of Mr. Darcy's words, their harshness, their honesty, their devastating clarity. She had railed against it at first, but now, days later, she saw how it had pruned her pride, how it had made her reconsider every assumption she had ever made. And just as rain softens the earth and makes it fertile, the parson continued, God pours his goodness upon us, kindness, provision, love, so that we might receive what he longs to give. But, and here his voice grew firmer, even divine patience has its limits. A hush fell over the room. God believes in the best results. He gives chance after chance. He waits, he nurtures, he pleads. But if the tree persists in refusing to bear fruit, fruit of love, of humility, of repentance, of service, then even mercy must make way for justice. The tree will be cut away from his goodness. Elizabeth's breath caught. She glanced sideways. Mr. Darcy sat several pews behind, alone, his face unreadable, but his posture rigid. He too had changed. She had heard from Jane that he had encouraged Mr. Bingley to renew his pursuit of Jane, that he had apologized to herself. Had Darcy not been a man who had once been a barren tree, proud, aloof, convinced of his own superiority? But now was he not being dug around, watered, pruned? And she? Had she not clung to her wit and her judgments like armor, refusing to see her own pride? Had not the events of the past days loosened something deep within her? The parson's voice softened once more. God does everything possible to build a fruitful relationship with us, but we must do our part. We must invest time in knowing him. We must show interest. We must bring devotion, real, daily, imperfect devotion. Not for show, but because we desire to know the one who first knew us. He opened his Bible to Hebrews 11:6. And without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. A profound stillness settled over the church. As the final hymn was sung and the benediction pronounced, the congregation rose slowly, as though emerging from a dream. Outside, the morning had warmed and sunlight danced on the cobblestones. Elizabeth lingered as her family walked ahead. She saw Mr. Darcy pause under the elm tree at the churchyard gate. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze. When their eyes met, he gave a slight nod. Nothing grand, but significant. Miss Bennet, he said quietly as she approached. Mr. Darcy, I found the sermon. He hesitated. Timely. As did I. She smiled faintly. I suppose we have both had an eventful week. He exhaled, almost a laugh. Indeed, and I find I am grateful for the pruning. She looked at him, really looked. There was a new softness in his eyes, a humility that had not been there before. As am I, she said. Nearby, Mr. Bingley stood with Jane, their hands nearly touching. He had returned, not just to court Jane, but to live differently. He had confessed to her his earlier weakness. Even Mrs. Bennet for once was silent. As they walked home, she murmured to Mr. Bennet, "That sermon, it struck me, you know. All that talk of hard soil. I do declare I've been a bit thorny lately." "Mr." Bennet raised an eyebrow. "Only lately?" She swatted his arm half-heartedly, but there was a new quietness in her step. That evening, as the sun set behind Longbourn, Elizabeth stood at the edge of the field where the old fig tree, long since barren, still stood. It was gnarled, its branches twisted, but this year, someone, perhaps one of the gardeners, had begun to care for it. The soil around it had been turned. Compost lay in rings at its base. She touched the bark. "Even you," she whispered, "might yet bear fruit." And she thought of Darcy's quiet strength, Bingley's earnest joy, Jane's forgiving heart. She thought of her own journey, from scorn to understanding, from pride to humility. The parable was not just a warning. It was a promise that no soul is beyond tending, that no heart is too hardened if God and we are willing to work the soil. And in that quiet field, with the stars beginning to glimmer above, Elizabeth Bennet believed, truly believed, that she was being made fruitful.